You guys are good to go.
Okay.
Thank you.
Nice volume. Great. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
It's not stapled together.
Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Certainly. Supervisor Moore,
Present.
Councilwoman McNamara.
Here.
Councilman Iacilli.
Here.
Councilman Powell.
Here today.
Councilman Scubone.
Present.
Thank you. Okay, the first item on our agenda is the Handle with Care program. And I'm happy to have with us Chief Kiernan,
Do you want to come up here?
Lars Clemenson from the Hampton-based school,
You
and
guys-
Christine Sclera.
Would you like
You
to
wanna
come up
come
here?
up?
Come up to the
Yes.
table.
We pretend that we're in our fireplace chat.
Christine, they need
Thank you.
one.
Some of them already have
Oh, okay.
a copy. Because I need 7. This is the word copy.
Yeah, I mean, you know what's in there already, I just wanted you to have a copy.
This is
Okay. Killing a lot of trees today.
Good morning,
Oh, that's
Supervisor. Good morning, Town Council. This morning, we appreciate you putting us on the agenda this morning. We have with me today, we have Hampton Bays Schools Superintendent Lars Clemenson. We're going to talk to you today about a program, Handle with Care. Now, in a moment, Mr. Clemenson's going to bring you through a slide program, a slide presentation, just detailing the program for you. And then we're here, obviously, to answer any questions that you have. We'll be looking for you to give us authority to go forward with a pilot, which would be from February to June. And at that time, we'd come back, report to you how the pilot went, and change it or not change it, and maybe bring it to all 9 school districts. For decades, the Southampton Town Police Department has embraced police reform. We've been on a track of police reform long before those 2 words were in the spotlight. When they did become a common term, police reform, and the national, state, and not so much local government, but decided that police agencies were doing things wrong and needed to reform, we were already on that track. We already had focus on service and prevention, and what we did, though, when we had those mandates at that time from Governor Cuomo, we just poured gasoline on the fire, and we started, for an example, we shrunk our training classes so that we can do more de-escalation and more scenario-based training. We made a whole division on community affairs, which gave us the ability to build partnerships in the community. I say that because this program is an example of that. Now, we know that the school districts are a center of any community. Not only are they charged and have the mission of educating our kids and ensuring a solid future for us in that respect, but they do bring people together, a community together, through their programs and sports and things like that. They make people learn about each other, embrace diversity, and they are the cornerstone. Whether you're purple, maroon, green, you get that sense of belonging from the school district. So when the police department partners with a school district, it could be very powerful and influential on young people. And we have 9 school districts, and we have positive relationships with all of them. This program that you're going to hear about today is a perfect example of how we partner with a school district for the good of youth in the community.
How
I'd like
did
to
you
reiterate, I'm sorry.
All right, I was just going to say, how did you become aware of
The program?
Yeah.
Well, it was brought to me by our school resource officer. He brought it to me and said, I want to tell you about a program that he's heard about. And then when you go through these slides, Mr. Clemenson's going to show you where it originated and where it's working now. But yeah, no, we did not invent this program, but we definitely embraced it when we heard about it.
Just to reiterate what the chief said earlier, I was here, before 2020, and when the Community Law Enforcement Review Committee was mandated by the state, and we brought the police in and community members. A lot of this, we called it community policing at the time. I mean, the Southampton Town Police Department had a lot of really great programs already in place, already, kind of going down that road. And I believe it was a very productive committee. One of the things that came out of it were the cameras, and in conjunction with the police department and the PBA. So, this is just an outgrowth of all of that. So we've been on this for the better part of a decade, at least since I've been here.
And I just want to say, Chief, I want to commend you and your department. I've observed since I've come on the board just all the great work and your embracing of criminal justice reform. I think it's very commendable. It's honorable. It's not easy work by any means, and I love that this work in particular helps to expand the diversification that you were talking about earlier. Really connecting with the community, as Tommy John said, and I like that this is also really focused on keeping children and families safe. And thanks also to you, Lars, for working so closely with the chief on this.
I want to say the same thing. Thank you. It shows that you guys care. You can see it when you talk about it, that you care about the community.
Well, let's hear about the
Turn it over
program.
to the-
Yeah. Purple, green, maroon. You'll notice that there's mostly purple in your folder right now. That's my go-to color. But to echo what the chief said, our partnership is it's so beneficial in so much more than what you would traditionally and on a basic level think about police being a response agency. We do so much work together in terms of prevention. Tony Vecchio, and I appreciate in the budget the investment that you're proposing for an expansion of police officers, because the work that we do together to prevent problems is super critical. So I would say that going into the pandemic, before I get into the slides, going into the pandemic, superintendents across the state are surveyed every year, and on a number of things about your financial outlook in the community, what your programming looks like, better, worse, what you think is coming down as a priority for your community. And one of the questions that's always asked is, if you had $1 extra to spend in your school district, what would you spend it on? And historically, it was add extracurricular, add athletics, arts, put an AP program in place, reduce the property tax levy, something along those lines. But beginning in 2017, 18 into 19, we started to see a shift in the data that superintendents were saying the extra dollar is going to go to support for wellness of kids, mental health services, social emotional learning, because we're starting to see students in what is called the iGen. We're post-millennials now. The millennials are teaching, so we're in post-millennials now. They are more isolated and more anxious than ever. They experiment with drugs and sex and alcohol at a lower rate than previous generations, but they're more isolated, they're more anxious, and they're more prone to self-injury, self-harm. And so that concerning trend is where the proactive relationship comes into play. So Handle with Care, and you have the slide deck in your folder, and then on the right-hand side is just a one-pager. We're going to do a little activity at the very end. It's going to take just about 30 seconds. But Handle with Care, the first couple of slides, certainly this is your bread and butter. You know Southampton Town is 140 square miles. So Chief and I have been having conversations with elected officials from the state assembly, state senate, all the way to Senator Schumer's office about this and about the expansion of school resource officer and school safety programming. So I always put this in to illustrate just how diverse and complex Southampton Town is. 140 square miles, and outside of the villages, the chief's jurisdiction for school districts includes 12 school buildings in 9 school districts. 4,300 students with the last official count. That's a lot. That's a remarkable size. And so I put that in there for the others to just illustrate the world we live in. And the collaboration between schools and the police department is everything from Shop with a Cop to DARE to police response when there's an emergency, to our trainings, police explorers. And we think Handle with Care, which is a program that is going to be a tap on the shoulder to faculty and staff that one of our children coming to school tomorrow morning might need a little bit more TLC. We do that every single day, but this one might need just a little bit more because of something that's going on out in the community. So we talk about adverse childhood experiences, and this is a score that you don't want to score well on, right? You want to get 100 on the algebra test. You do not want 100 on your ACEs score, because an adverse childhood experience is anything from abuse, neglect, household dysfunction, and you can see that those 10 elements, if you have a score of 10, you've had an adverse childhood. There have been a number of traumas in your life, from dysfunction, incarceration of a family member, abuse of a mother, neglect, any number of these. And so with each ACE that a child has, there is physiological and economic impact to these kids. They're more prone to health problems like heart disease, to suicide, to suicidal ideation. And there's an economic factor as well, because the more ACEs a child has when they grow up, they are more likely to be dependent on the system. Food insecurity, housing insecurity, using the social safety nets. So the work that we can do to mitigate ACEs for kids only sets them up for success in life. So trauma looks different in classes with every student. It could be the head on the desk, it could be coming in dirty and disheveled, it could be kids coming in hungry, and it could be kids acting out in the classroom, right? And if Lars comes into the classroom and Lars is typically not ready for class, he's a mess, the homework is not done. As humans, teachers can be frustrated by that. Lars doesn't have his homework again. I'm like, enough, Lars, like, get it done. And there could be a frustration, and Lars could act out in class. But what we sometimes know, because of the good relationship that we have, and Handle with Care is an approach to institutionalize it across Southampton town, ideally, is that there might be something going on at home that is creating Lars not to be defiant, but creating a situation where Lars is in trauma. And instead of an interaction between a teacher and a student that sends the student to the dean of students, it might be better to send them to the nurse or send them to the social worker. And so it'll be a Saturday night, and I'll hear from chief, or I'll hear from a lieutenant, and just say, hey, something went down at this house. You need your team on the ground on Monday morning. That happens just because we have that strong relationship. Handle with Care is an opportunity for us, again, to institutionalize it. It started in 2013 in West Virginia. It is also active in parts of Maryland, Colorado, and the entire state of New Jersey. It was brought to Suffolk County by Dr. Ron Massera, who's now retired superintendent from Santa Mauritius, who, as a leader in our superintendent's work, really focused our profession on the wellness of students. And so he brought this along with Rebecca Sainin, who serves now in the county legislature, but was director of the Health and Welfare Council. We had initial conversations as a superintendent's association with the Suffolk County Police Department, but in my work in that group, I'm the guy at the end of the table saying, don't forget the 5 East End towns. You know, it's not just the western part of the county. And so the pilot here is a perfect bite-sized opportunity for us to put this in place. In short, police officer responds, sector car responds to one Main Street for any call. Domestic dispute, an overdose where Narcan is necessary, a death, a broken leg, something. And the police officer identifies and sees in person, not just evidence of, but that the child is present at this call. Child looks school age. As part of the standard operating procedure, when the officer's back in the car, finalizing the paperwork and the CC report, another step of this is a 30-second Handle with Care notification. They're going to scan a QR code, and you see that on the back of your ivory colored paper. They were supposed to be here by now, but the stickers are probably lost in Christmas card printing by Canva. But those stickers will go on the laptops in the sector car, and the police officer will scan that, and you can scan that too with your cell phones right now just to see what happens. And you are the police officer is simply going to say, click the school district in a drop down, Hampton Bays, 1 Main Street. They'll put the CC number because on the back end, the police, Tony Vecchio, our SRO, is going to review those the following day so he's more intimately aware of what police activity took place with kids in a home. Just another belt and suspenders on the relationship. They're going to click Handle with Care or Handle with Care Code Red. We made a decision. The Code Red calls are sudden death in the household, suicide or an attempt, drug or alcohol overdose, physical violence that's resulted in serious injury, serious medical injury, immediate home displacement like a fire. Anything else is Handle with Care. But and then you click Submit. So it takes 30 seconds. We're not getting into the juicy details of what happened at the house because we don't need to know that necessarily. Because if we know that, and then we say, Jen, tell us what happened last night. Was everything okay? And it's well-meaning. It's not to share gossip and get, the juice. But it reintroduces trauma to a student. Tell us what happened. Last night sounds like it was pretty bad at your house. That's a reintroduction of trauma to a child. What the Handle with Care notice does when that officer clicks Submit, instantly it sends an email to our Director of School Safety and others who we've decided as a school district. We'll disseminate that. We'll look at the address first to see, are there school-age children? Maybe they go to OLH and we'll send it to Sister Kathy. And then we'll disseminate it to the teacher. All the teacher knows is Lars Handle with Care. So tomorrow morning, if Lars comes in and he looks tired, if his head's on his desk, if he has a little bit of an outburst, maybe it's just getting proximity to Lars and putting a hand on the shoulder saying, want to take a walk? You want to go to the reading corner? Whatever the de-escalation procedures you have in your classroom, and teachers have different ones that really work. But instead of jumping to Lars is being disruptive and it's a discipline problem, we're understanding that there is possibly some trauma that is happening. Lars might not present in any way because trauma is buried sometimes for kids. But it's just that antenna that's up where we're just giving an extra look, an extra eye. Maybe Lars is last to leave the classroom. You say something like, you're always welcome here. I got pretzels, I got water. If you need to decompress, you're always welcome. You want to eat lunch here today or something. Or I'm just going to watch and see if there's an intervention that's needed. A Code Red is likely going to need the social workers and the crisis response team at school ready. If there's an immediate home displacement or something like that, we're going to go to Katie's Closet. We're going to go to Food for Thought, our school food pantry. We're going to make sure that the basic needs are met and that we're actually probably going to intervene there because it's something so traumatic, we probably need to have a counseling session with that student. So the pilot, the chief and I are going to work with the 6th.
Although, how would you know that?
We would know Code Red, and then we would probably hear from Tony the next morning. So it wouldn't be immediate. And something like that, we probably wouldn't see the student the next morning.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a Code Red of grandma, a Handle with Care, grandma broke her ankle, and it was scary and upsetting. It's just going to be, keep your eyes on that child. My uncle overdosed in the kitchen is going to be much more traumatic. And so that's when we see a Code Red, we would probably, what I would do, I'd probably text Tony or the chief and say, anything I need to know here to best support the student. And again, this is happening organically, but we intend that Handle with Care doesn't leave it to chance. If I'm a new superintendent who has not developed a relationship with our sector officers or the chief or the superior officers in the department, or there's a new officer in the sector who doesn't have those relationships yet, that might not happen so fast. We'll hear from Tony later the next day or in the week, but this leaves, that takes the chance out of it. We talked to all the states who are doing this, And there's a little bit of a Goldilocks level setting that needs to happen, which is why in that memorandum of understanding, two important points that I want to make. One, we will be meeting on a regular basis to assess, are we doing too many handle with care calls that is just sort of diluting the program? Are there not enough? Yeah, and sort of level set to make sure we're appropriate. The other piece that I think is important, and as I understand came from questions you all have previously had, is there's a do no harm element to this. There's no liability there's no intention that if you didn't do a handle with care and something bad happened, that somebody made a mistake. This is a belt while you're wearing suspenders.
There's not a duty of care to actually.
Correct, yeah.
Like if, for instance, the officer didn't see a child present and didn't report it, but there does happen to be a child that lives at that residence,
Right.
it wouldn't be on them.
Correct. Even if a child was present and the child seemed fine, and it was a minor emergency, grandma broke her ankle, the child might be upset, but the officer made the decision not to do a handle with care. Again, no liability that anything was done wrong. Just like in the MOU, I think it also said that, you know, the school also has an obligation to acknowledge that we do not care for kids solely based on a handle with care call. This is just an icing on the cake on how we work together to handle
But
kids.
if there was an incident and the child did have a drown, like a trauma, or it was an abuse problem and was brought to the, you know, by the officer, and then the school had it, is there further work on that done to help that child?
Yeah,
That
but-
way, you know, kind of break the system so they doesn't grow up to be an adult and abuse other people and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Yeah. And I would venture to guess, as we go through this process, there are instances where one Main Street had a trauma once, and that was it. You know, families sometimes are just, you know, chugging along fine, and something happens. But I would venture to say that as we look at the data and the addresses, there will be few surprises. You know, we have teams at school who meet regularly, counselors, social workers, nurses, administrators, and we have our radar. And I would venture to say there's a
Yeah.
correlation between the kids we see and the files chief has in his
Yeah.
office that he monitors.
It's really important because you want to break that, what's happening to the child, so that it doesn't grow up and do it to their child or do it to other people.
Yeah. Yeah, when you reintroduce trauma and it
Yeah.
becomes generational, it is very hard to break the
Yeah,
cycle.
especially nowadays with social media, you know, it's on Facebook and everything, you know, Instagram. It's bad.
Yeah.
People like bullying other people.
It's easier to do now. You know,
Yeah, it's
when-
very easy.
if you were bullied when we grew up, mom took
Yeah.
the phone off the cradle and,
Yeah.
and you were done. You were
Yeah.
safe at
Yeah.
least from 3 until 7, but now
Now
it's
it's-
midnight and kids are, it
Yeah,
is
kids-
a big challenge.
Yeah, kids are ruthless.
Yeah.
And you don't want the kids to grow up to be like that.
So if you, the notification tool on the slides is a dummy QR code because it's really something that's specific to the police department,
Yeah.
but the one on your ivory page.
Yeah, I just did it. It works.
Yeah. So where this would go, so this is a Google form. New Jersey has it as a piece of paper. Colorado has an officer in their department, like I guess would be like a desk sergeant, who in the overnight shift reviews all the calls from that day and make sure they get to the school. We felt this technological tool that we have is instantaneous, and so the chief and his department will know the details of the calls. We don't need to know it at midnight or 3 in the morning or 6 in the morning. We just need to know Lars might be coming in and need a little something different.
But the QR code brings up
The
all the
form,
different, sudden death, suicide, drugs, so.
just as examples.
Code red.
Right, that's just for the officer to say, is it one of these things?
All right,
Oh,
you're
it's a
not
red.
like selecting one.
Correct.
Well, it says incident type and then you
I
select
wanted to
one.
make it as easy as I could on the police officer. So that's just why, so if they see one of those things, oh, I know it's a red. So if they check one of those, the school's not gonna get that. Their school's just gonna get, it's red.
If you look at the slide that has the purple box at the top, that is all the school district gets on the email side. Handle with care notification, so school agent occupants residing at 27 Main Street. Additional details, code red. we don't need to know anything else necessarily.
And I apologize if this is if you already mentioned this, but you'll also get the other codes, right? If it wasn't as serious as a code red, you would still get that notification.
It's just other.
It'll say other.
Yep.
Okay.
So the only two things we would see is handle with care code red.
Got it.
Just sort of to give us a temperature of what we
Sure.
might be dealing with the next
Sure.
day.
You know, we've been very lucky that we had, you know, first when I was here, Eric Plum, who
Yeah.
had an amazing relationship with the schools. You know, in retirement, he's still working with the schools. And now Tony Vecchio. And all I hear from them is they wish they could do more.
Yeah.
You know, and this kind of helps not bridge that gap, but it really does make sure you get the information and it doesn't leave it on that one, because if you see all the schools that they're responsible for, you know, and there's stuff happening throughout the town, for them to go in and find out what's going on and report it to the school and vice versa, I think this really does, and I truly believe that for every one kid that you get one of these notifications for, there's probably 5 that no call
Sure.
was made to the police. So, you know, it's great that you have those tools in your toolbox as well to help these students. You know, just going through this, it does seem like like an amazing thing that, I mean, I think we should very well be doing. And I brought up the question when Chief brought this to us, well, let's just do this in every school. But as he brought, there's you know, fine tuning that needs to be done, and I'm sure the other schools are on board with trying to get this through. And you know, schools have different budgets; they have different means accessible to them. I know, like I think East Quogue now has even an emotional support dog in the school. They have social workers, and you know, there was times when I was in the school where we didn't have that kind of a budget. We didn't even have a social worker that was dedicated to the building. So having that SRO who knows the kids, and you know, it's even more important now because of the mental health issues that we're seeing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it is a great point. One of the things that Chief said first of all, I just want to thank Christine, you all, and the Chief as well. None of us have ever seen bureaucracies like a town and a school district move so quickly. Our first meeting was October 8th. And so just to see this collaboration for something good come together so fast has been great. And in our early meetings, you know, the Chief said, there's not an officer on the force who hasn't gone home emotional from a call, knowing that there was a kid that was left at that house in a really bad situation. And so what this does is it doesn't just make the responsibility of the kids on Tony. It empowers every officer in the department to be able to go home and say, I've made sure that tomorrow morning there's going to be somebody with a smile and I say smile, that sounds cliche, but
Supporting.
when they get to school in the morning.
I'm interested to know a little bit more about the social services that schools provide. You mentioned the extra $1 earlier in this meeting. Like, you know, if schools had an extra $1, it would go into support, emotional, social support. Have schools been increasing funding in these? I think I already know the answer, but to what extent have schools been increasing the social support for their students?
So we have 3 schools in Hampton Bays. I have 4 school psychologists, 4 nurses, 5 social workers. So in the human capacity, looking to add those supports because in the community, access to mental health care quickly is limited. If there's a real crisis, it's an hour to get a student up to Stony Brook CPAP. The South Fork Mental Health Initiative that was originally started by Senator Laval and Assemblyman Field. There's now a North Fork one as well. We have some immediate emergency telehealth through Family Service League, but it's those crisis response components. But then when you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that pyramid, the top is a fully self-actualized, confident human being who knows themselves and can be successful and contribute to society. At the bottom is food, shelter, and water and safety. And so Hampton Bays has a partnership with Stop and Shop where we have food pantries in each building, and they're not a shelf with a couple canned goods. It's understanding the reality and the data behind food insecurity. You know, at Thanksgiving, are we giving turkeys, and we feel good about giving turkeys, but there's no oven to cook the turkey. There's no basting There's no, you know, like,
It's year round.
right, and turkey might not be what that family needs, right? So this this food pantry that we have is called Food for Thought, right? You eat, you're smart, it's cool. So very discreet. Kids can go in and they're macaroni and cheese, peanut butter, crackers, soup, you know, canned goods. Do they have? If they don't have the pop, do they have a can opener at home? You know, so there's we have Katie's Closet, which is a nonprofit that started up in Lawrence, Massachusetts, and Boston, where we have a partnership with J. Crew, Kohl's through Katie's Closet. We get some gently used and new items, sneakers, toiletries, and it's not, oh, you need a sweatshirt, it's in the cardboard box over there, and maybe it's a lost and found sweatshirt, which is usually my son Ryland's.
On another
But it's a nice place to go. It's like a boutique. It's hung, it's sized, it's grouped. So it's from the basic to the counseling all the way at the top.
Which is good.
To follow up on your question, the schools, as you know, have mandates on top of mandates on top of mandates, so they do have to provide those physiological needs. And now, like you mentioned, more in-depth mental health support. We're working on another project that you're going to become more familiar with. That you are familiar with. Where we're now going to start talking to Family Service League, who really likes the project as well, just as another partner, so that when the school has their mental health function, but now we could refer if they need something more than just what the school can provide. Then you can have people from Family Service League who is already in contract with the county. So we have that. We actually have that, which Christine actually looked into with the county attorneys. We're able to share information back and forth because we contract with each other. So it's a good transition and it's a good resource.
Right. My sense with the four nurses, the social workers, that's not atypical for a school district to have. I mean, I was a school teacher. I absolutely appreciate the support services that were provided. You know, but when I started, we had one school psych, and it was guidance that was doing it. And the single nurse, you know, and that's how it was then. That was started in the last century. Things are different now. And so these services are increasing in schools.
Yeah, and I tongue-in-cheek say to my administrative team, because a number of our staff live up the island, you know, it's something you all are wrestling with as well, and I remind them, these people pass like 18 school districts on the way out to Hampton. You better be nice to them. You better bring them coffee because they're hard to find too. The other thing we're struggling with in the education world is we've seen a decline in the number of people, candidates coming into the field, bilingual social workers, mental health professionals. It's a long process. It's an expensive process to be certified and to hire. So once upon a time when you put out, I need an English teacher to get resumes this big. Now I got 2 candidates and I hope they both show up for the interview. So it is a challenge. And what happens then with these teams in schools, their primary focus is to remove immediate barriers so kids can be academically successful. We are not charged or capable with doing that higher level of more intense therapy, more intense support. And that's why that partnership with Family Service League would be so critical. We got to get them up, dusted off, and back into class to keep the whole machine moving. And it's the community health piece through Stony Brook, Southampton, through Northwell, through Family Service League that we really need to then hand the baton to put their arms around the entire family.
But it has to stop with the school.
Everything. The school's at the bottom of the hill. Everything rolls down to the school.
It's like the town board.
Yeah, it's not reading, writing, arithmetic. You know, sometimes I'll hear from people, "You're a little bit out of your lane on this, Lars." And well, I'm all over the highway because at the end of the day, the buses are rolling in, and those kids are coming. Right.
My daughter does this in East Hampton.
Does mental health support?
Child psychologist.
And I'm sure East Hampton's a leader. School district is a leader in mental health support, and I'm sure they want to clone her 10 times over.
Yeah. Well, I agree. Prevention's critical, and this is so proactive. And when the chief first mentioned it to all of us, everyone wholeheartedly in favor of hearing more about it and pursuing it. So thanks for coming in, and
Thank
this
you.
is very well thought out and protective of everyone's rights. So
Thank you.
that's
Yes.
important.
That's the goal, yeah.
Yeah.
There is a community conversation that we intend to have because
It's a good idea.
we all get it,
But
right?
other people might not get it.
And if you're a family member who is experiencing trauma and you might not want the school to know that,
Yeah.
right? And so there is a trust factor
Yeah.
that we are going to be very cognizant of over the next few months because we don't want families to say there is an emergency that happened in our house. We don't want the police telling on us to the
Yeah.
school. So we've been in communication with Minerva at Present Ola and other organizations as well.
Mhm.
Hard to have the the PTA meetings, things like that. But that trust building is important
Yeah.
because it's for the benefit of the kid.
Because too, as you know, though, once you start that ball rolling towards a CPS visit, and it's very hard to get out of that. And it's, sometimes it is a one-off event, and it's just they need support for that time. But it is too, like, being cognizant of sometimes, things happen, and it doesn't necessarily mean they're bad parents or bad family, and so
No, they need
they
a
don't want
support.
that the stigma could
Yep.
be more damaging than the event.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And just to further this along, on next Thursday, you'll see a resolution authorizing the supervisor and the chief to sign the 6-week pilot program memorandum of understanding that I went over with each of you last time, enable the changes as suggested in paragraphs 13 and 14.
That's good.
Mhm.
It's very
But
But
important.
in
Board
the
of Education
meantime, you'll
has to
have
as
the meetings with the parent community, so that you don't want to have a chilling effect on their wanting to or needing to call for help.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah. So we would look to our Board of Education approved the MOU, and so the chief has the signed copies for you all
Okay.
your consideration next week.
Got mine.
We would do we would do the trainings with the police department, have the community conversations, and look for probably a February 1st start. And then we'll go through June 30th.
I have a
Thank
question.
you. I also know that you're going to do a considerable amount of work with your team, your administration, and your teachers as well. That's going to be.
Yeah, we had Kim
That's you
Lowry do the training with us from HUGS
Mhm.
on adverse child experiences.
Just
on
how
election
they
day.
handle that in their system is going
Yep.
to be key.
Yes.
But
Is there
Kim.
a alleyway for, say, if a family had an incident and the police did not come, it was handled inside the family, if a family member could call, is there a way for that to happen?
Well, the school district will always accept
Yeah.
information about kids
Yeah,
so
in a private way.
The answer to that is yes, they'll always listen when it concerns the
Yeah.
students.
It's
And there are
remarkable what our
privacy.
social workers know
Yeah.
before anybody else knows.
I know.
And they keep their privacy, right?
Yes.
There's an act that they have to comply with.
I'm gonna give this to my daughter when I go home.
Absolutely, yeah.
I just want to say, because you brought it up, Kim Lauby is an amazing community resource in all of this. So
Yeah, she was remarkable. She spent, we had superintendent's conference day on election day.
Yeah.
And did a great training on this, not on Handle with Care, but on adverse child experiences and what that means in the classroom.
She really cares and puts herself out there
Yeah.
to help.
I'm grateful for the time and for the support of this, and we'll look forward to being back here when it's warmer to give you a
Update.
debrief
Yeah.
on how the pilot went.
So
Okay.
once we sign or adopt the resolution, then that's our part is, you don't need anything
Right,
else
yeah.
on the
No,
board.
Jackie
and
has
then we'll-
our MOU.
Oh, yours already has, them. Great.
Thank you.
Terrific.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for
everybody.
coming in.
Happy
Thank you.
holidays.
Yeah,
Happy
you too.
holidays.
All right, the next item on our agenda is some proposed code changes regarding plantings. And we have Sean Cambridge, our assistant town attorney, Janice Shear, land management administrator.
Hey, Janice.
You should have been on this. I hope you had a chance to look at these. I didn't even think of it.
That's no problem.
And Ryan
I have
maybe.
been,
taking one past each stack down.
involved.
Okay.
Yeah, don't give this to me.
Okay.
I don't know how many.
This is not new.
Yeah.
I've heard
I don't
it's been
want it.
around the bend a few times. We should have probably
Well, you
sent
gotta
it
hand
to.
me the stack.
Oh,
Keep one.
Getting them all straight
I'm
first
telling you,
before
I
you.
can't handle it.
Okay.
There's too much
Weren't you ever in school? Take one and pass it down? That's like the first thing you learn in school.
I know, and I'm a B too, actually. So I usually sit in the front of the.
Again,
Another one for you.
Yes, we have a couple different things going on here today.
Another one for you.
yeah, some of the,
Excuse me one moment, sorry.
some of the, civic association members in the town asked about this, and I've heard that this has been talked about by prior boards, so let's see what we can get done here. If there's any resolution to help.
Probably makes sense to talk about the one labeled 33083 first, because that's a planting restriction, and then the other two are clearing restrictions.
Okay,
So this is one that was brought forward by community members, and they're seeking a prohibition. The last page is really the change to our code section. For
yeah,
no hedge, shrub, tree of any nature, essentially within 5 feet of property lines.
Mhm.
So that is their goal when you're doing new plantings, to not have that up against a fence line, things like that.
what they're saying is that, well, what I've heard, that the issues are is that, when somebody plants along the property line, the privet hedge, for example, can get so high. And, or maybe privet's not the best example because it doesn't hang over, although it does get wide, so.
It's a good example because when it gets big and high, like Sean does it on his property line, and it goes over to Janice's, then she has to pay to have someone cut it on her side.
Yeah, and it's not a matter of just getting
might
your
not
own
want it on your
pruning
property.
shears out.
Yeah.
It's, you've got to hire someone to get up on the
Everybody
ladder.
understands privet gets like 20, 30 feet wide.
Yeah,
So what is 5 feet gonna do?
well,
I'm just asking.
yeah, I mean, and there, there's certainly other plantings that it
Do
would
we
apply to.
currently have anything, regarding this on property lines, plantings on property lines?
We don't. As far as trimming trees, the state common law actually is kind of against imposing that obligation on the property owner. So the state's consistently ruled that you have a self-help remedy, meaning that your neighbor's trees are over your property line, you have the right to chop them along your property line. So this is a way to,
Overhanging too.
yeah, this is a way to lessen that burden on the neighbor by making them move 5 feet backwards from that property line. That's the intent here.
It's a good start, even with a hedge, because that gives the you access to, trim on that side until it gets to over the 5 feet to hit the Janice's side.
How does this get enforced?
How does that work enforcement wise? Because we can't go on
I know.
people's properties
Can't go in
and
their
go
backyard.
measuring 5 feet
That's
along
correct.
Well,
people's
first of all, we're
property
not going to make it retroactive, right? So
We
it's not like
can't.
you're
We
not
can't
going to make
possibly.
people move their hedges, but this is just would be going forward.
So for this to work, I'd envision this on the front end, basically when someone's building a new house or in a full site plan, that you're saying this is where you plant. This cannot be retroactive. It would
No.
be an ex post facto law.
And that's how you enforce. It's part of the site plan. The building inspector will see it with everything else that he goes to inspect, right?
Building inspectors don't inspect tree
Trees,
plantings.
no.
And usually they
We
don't
will
even have
now.
the trees put in until
Later
way
on.
later.
I mean, I'm just gonna give you a perfect
So that's
example.
why I'm
There's
concerned
a
we don't have anyone to inspect.
general contractor that does a 5-lot subdivision, and they plant 30-foot green giants, 30-foot mature trees that I would rather have somebody plant that than a million little things down the property line in between each property to delineate the properties, instead of now you're saying they've got to plant 2 sets 5 feet out. I mean, they're already 20 feet wide on the bottom. What is planting them 5 feet over the property line going to do?
I know in the village of West Hampton Beach, which is my point of reference from coming here, is that we had a code that said for the front of the property. I noticed you included front, but I was wondering if the town had something similar where we don't allow planting within 3 feet of the right of way because we don't want the overgrowth over the sidewalk. So that's what occurred to me, that this could be a similar code to protect the rights of way and also the
I
rights
think
of the
when you're
neighbors.
talking about that, that's much more enforceable because we can drive by in plain view and see something like that. But if it says of the property lines of the lot, and now you're talking side and rear, and that would require you to enter upon someone's property and know where the property boundary is to be able to
Yeah.
tell the
So-
It
5
was
feet.
part of the site plan.
There is no
No,
site
there's
plan
not-
for a
not for a
residential
house.
dwelling.
It's-
There's no such thing.
It's a very difficult, like Janice says, it's a very difficult law to enforce.
No one comes in for a site plan for a home. So
You're gonna have,
that's a
But there
planning
are
board thing.
certainly setback requirements that are in place, and you're
For
telling me nobody comes and inspects?
for structures.
Structures.
The
Structure,
structure, yes.
yeah.
But the plans
the
don't
plan
have to
itself-
go with the structures, they could be
No.
put in 10 years later.
Are you all saying that the ARB doesn't review fences and plantings in the town?
Fences are over 6 feet are regulated as a permit and not an ARB review. They're just put in for a fence permit. You can expect to get a fence permit. We're not looking at that. So I just, I think
But
it's a
what-
great idea.
what would-
Don't get me wrong. I just don't know how you'll
Well,
enforce it.
Can I
That's
ask what would happen, and this is just a hypothetical, and I don't know if there's been situations like this, but what would happen if a neighbor planted a tree or some sort of shrub on another neighbor's property line? How would that be settled?
in court.
Currently,
Yeah.
It's a
Civil
civil
matter.
dispute. It's not a town dispute.
I had a case at
That's
my,
a civil matter. That
So-
doesn't,
and so
you're
who-
now bringing the municipality into the middle of that. If there's some kind of
And that would
issue,
be mitigated through code?
there's
Code
civ-
enforcement would be contacted
No,
by
no,
the
Normally-
NBC?
Normally,
Civil
right
court.
now, it's just
No, you
civil.
file a civil-
But for it to get to court, you have to call somebody to take a look at
Right.
what's
So you're
So
happening.
neighbor.
if you have a law on
Okay.
the books, which you're trying to do, then that's how you bring.
Well, even without a law, you can bring a nuisance claim in civil Supreme Court. So you can say my property rights are affected by X, Y, or Z.
Okay.
Things like noise, light, any nuisance that you can think of, you have a private nuisance action. Once the town acts, we're saying something can have a public nuisance action. So once everyone in the town is interested in the same thing, that's gonna give us standing to be involved. So that's the difference between private and public nuisance. A public nuisance affects usually 3 or more people, 3 or more households. So once you have a law in the books, arguably this is a public nuisance now, rather than a private nuisance.
between two properties.
Mm-hmm.
But how could it be a public nuisance if it's in the rear yard of a lot that only abuts one other property?
Well,
In other words, the
gonna
front yard, like you were saying in
We're
West Hampton,
categorizing
makes
it
more
as an
sense
issue
to
that affects the
me.
whole town that way.
What you're gonna have is people that don't wanna trim stuff on their property are going to call code enforcement to their house. They're gonna take out their tape measure and they're gonna go, look, it's planted 5 feet closer to my property line than it should be. And then we're gonna be involved, right? And then we have to, well, when was it planted? Was it planted before this law? Was it planted after this law? Who makes that decision? Like, it's,
One of the, okay,
I
sorry.
think from a tree clearing perspective, that's on private property, but we're talking about that after this. So there certainly are circumstances where you can have a rule and you say, don't, plant when you build your home and you have your certain setbacks and there's certain rules that have to be complied with. You don't plant within 3 or 5 feet of the property line.
I mean, you're all the policymakers, so you can certainly do that. You're well within your ability to regulate in that way. Enforcement is not necessarily your problem. And on the front end, you certainly can say this is how it's going to be, and designate who is going to do this. Keep in mind on that back end, yes, you may have some issues.
And I just want to say, and I don't mean to interrupt, but I think that there have been legitimate comments that have come to my office, certainly, from senior citizen ladies who have neighbors that have overgrowth, and they can't reach up to cut the trees or the.
This won't fix that.
Yeah,
No.
this isn't saying that
You-
now is.
you-
But it at least starts a precedence where in the future it
New
could be
plantings.
avoided,
You-
right?
You can't. There's no way you can enforce it.
You
And
shouldn't be allowed to plant on a property line. I just don't think you should plant on a property line when
Yeah.
you know it's going to reach over on someone
yeah,
else's
you
property.
should have the decency. Like when I plant my trees, I keep it back. A good fence makes a good neighbor. I had a neighbor who planted bamboo. You know what bamboo does? And I actually, sent him a letter from a lawyer and said that he's responsible. I researched it and said he was responsible for any damage his roots or the bamboo comes when it crosses the property line.
So that's something a little different. That's something
That's
town of
something
Brookhaven
different.
does about containment, and DEC regulates that area currently here.
It's bamboo, yeah.
So that's a little bit separate from this,
Different.
and we've looked into that at various points in various administrations of the town as well. That is also very, very hard to enforce
It is.
because you cannot enter people's properties.
No, you
Same
can't.
as this. So here, the hard enforcement areas are going to be your rear property lines. Code enforcement, building inspectors, anyone who's issuing a charge has a plain view vantage point. So that's from the street, anywhere a postman would go that you can think of is where they can observe this property from. So
Unless you're called on to an adjacent property
and have consent.
and have consent.
Right.
Which is probably what would happen.
So this maybe does have its challenges, but everything has its challenges.
Yeah.
This is why this is separated into two subdivisions here. One's addressing the front of your property, one's addressing the other.
I
sides of
mean,
your
hypothetically, just if this were to be implemented,
It doesn't say, what do you mean? I'm sorry, what do you mean it's separated? It says
so-
Corner
front,
clearance, the
side, or
second
rear.
one is-
Yeah, the second is corner clearance. We do have a corner clearance code already, but it's not specific to plantings. So this would
And it's
prohibit
not-
new plantings within that corner clearance
That's in the
area.
front.
Which
Right,
is good,
front.
but, and that's also commercial and this is residential, so.
Go ahead, Michael, please.
no, go ahead, Tommy. I'll
What about a
chime in.
scenario where someone plants 5 feet back from the property line and it's a, I don't know, spruce, right? It grows up, 12 years go by, and now that spruce is, it's 20 feet in diameter and it's going over the property line.
Doesn't
And-
address that at all,
It does.
except for this corner clearance provision. We don't want to be
Block the road.
having people have a blind turn, things like that.
Well, I'm guess going back to the back property line, the supposition here is that it's not going to
Nothing
encroach
like that.
on the other person's property, which I believe is the intent. I don't want to put that there.
Well, the
but that's what I
supposition
think.
isn't that it won't ever encroach, it's that it gives it a good chance not to,
Mhm.
depending on the plantings and how long it takes for them to grow.
Okay, so when they do, or if they do,
This
then,
doesn't remedy
I mean, there's nothing in here, and there's nothing, no recourse for the neighbor who may not.
No, because the state common law is the reverse of
can
that. It
cut
says you have the right to self-help. We've
Uh-huh.
done that on some of our
And that
own
currently
parking
exists.
lots. That's
This is state common law.
precedent going back to the days of England,
Right, no one's trying to change that.
So,
I'm not trying to change that.
but so this is creating an air gap in new plantings essentially.
But if they comply and they're 5 feet away and it still hangs over the same issue, they're not in.
Right, it doesn't
they're
fix that
not-
issue.
They're not in contravention to the new code is all I think you were trying to say.
And this doesn't change fencing at all, you could still put the fencing on the property line. or
You
nothing.
should always put your fence on the property
Right.
line, unless,
Within the height
otherwise they'll make you
standards,
put in
all
a
that.
gate, like it's always an issue if you don't put it on the property.
Well, then you have adverse possession
Yeah, you have
claims and things
issues
like
and
that, and you
fence
don't wanna
belongs
really
on the
get into
property
that.
line.
So,
Yes, good fence makes a good neighbor.
all right, so then we have two other provisions here today, which are two different directions. So we had a work group with the prior administration. We'll take a look at the one that says July 26, 2022. Councilman Schiavone sponsored this bill, which was defeated ultimately by the last board, who frankly did not want to pass a clearing restriction. Councilman Schiavone had us draft this. On page 3, there is a use chart with restriction standards. And the idea here was to, because enforcement was the focus here, this creates a box on your property line from the outside in. So on the first size property, 27,779, you'd have no restriction. The next one, you'd have a 10 feet restriction from your property lines.
But now
So-
is it 5, if you can't plant within 5?
Well, it can be really whatever you like it to be, but this idea is on for discussion today because it's very easy for code enforcement to enforce. They all have laser tape measures. This is as simple as you hit the first tree that's not cleared and you know how much they've cleared. So this is boxing out a setback of your whole yard based on the perimeter. This was designed in this way to protect your building envelope from not having a clearing restriction. So the spot in the center of your property where you're looking to build your house, you're not gonna have a clearing restriction. But the perimeters, which frankly usually are the areas that are drawing attention from neighbors, this guy cleared his whole property. Well, it's a problem now because I can see it and I live next to you. This creates that buffer that otherwise would not be regulated. Yes, we have some regulation. We regulate wetlands. We regulate the APOD district within the town, but the rest of the town has absolutely no clearing restrictions. So this would prevent people from clear cutting and leave at least a considerable buffer based on these guidelines. You can certainly shift the guidelines in any direction you so desire, but again, this is a nice way for code enforcement to quickly measure and determine the foot range that's been cleared. They have the laser tape,
25
the tree with it.
So I wanted to go back and look at the past discussion. It's on that date.
It should be on that date or up to that date. There was a work group that was meeting informally without a quorum to develop some of these types of codes.
Okay.
That's where this other proposed code amendment has come from also. In addition, there was a talk of doing a whole second APOD type legislation. The board did not support that at the time.
I think considering one of these, and I know you're going to go through the other one. The other draft is a little more simpler.
The other draft is a lot simpler.
But I think given some of the issues that have been brought to our attention by the various civic groups and CACs that we have on extensive clearing that many hamlets have experienced, I think we should really consider implementing a restriction of one of these types.
Janice, our biggest issue that I come across is remember I had asked you how they get away with, like, a contractor goes in and clears lot line to lot line, and you said, well, they did the clearing and then they come in for a site plan review. How do we close that loophole?
We've been doing that already where we're now requiring actually it's been policy, but I plan to bring it forward as a change in the way we look at APOD in the code, where we require like a planning inspection where they have to put up protective fencing and then the clearing, because the way it is now, the building department is not the environmental department, and the environmental department has one person and two techs. Like, there's no way we could get all the wetland permits done and go around and do all the APOD. So we have to sort of, and then they come in for revegetation plans. So and it's a big problem because a 30-year-old mature ecosystem is not the same thing as when you clear cut something and then put in a couple of little bayberries, so we really want to close that loop.
Well, not only that, I mean, there's more to it than just the trees. I mean, because when they clear cut a property like that and then they go in and they do construction, you've seen it, there's 45 cars on the front lawn, they're compacting all of the soil, and it's just not a good situation all around for drainage and everything else, so.
Hard to replace an ecosystem.
Yeah.
So we really do, and that was, remember I had come with like a little graph of a little table, all different code amendments I'm working on to be able to fix that.
Well, I've talked to Sean McDermott about, trying to send out notices to various builders that when there's a project, they try their very best to limit the number of vehicles per project so that we're accounting for the traffic. And I guess that's another implication as well, just the impacts that those vehicles have being on the property and the amount of vehicles that there are on the property. But I think that's a separate matter than what we're looking at here.
Well, you have, the broader point is you have an established rule of law, the Aquifer Protection Overlay District, with very specific clearing restrictions, and they're being violated day in and day out, which is a real problem. So, and we've been trying to contain that and penalize people for it and make it harder to do it. But the truth is, people are still doing it, and so and I'm all for the tree preservation law. I've worked on this for many years. It's just the enforcement side is the most important thing, I would say.
And part of the issue there is, you only have a very specialized staff that understands the existing APOD code and wetlands code, are in our environmental division who are not law enforcement.
So we need to beef it up then.
So the idea
in terms
here,
of the
these
education.
are simple steps here to make your enforcement employees, your code enforcement, your building inspector, your police department, your fire marshals, able to do something. They can count 25 trees. They can measure 10 feet.
Right.
They can measure 60 feet.
Right.
They can't calculate 25% of 54 acres.
Sure.
They have no idea.
So you're saying this law actually provides
So this
some
is a
baseline
toolkit
knowledge.
of how to enforce for
Okay.
someone without a specialized knowledge base.
Well, the only thing about the one in blue,
Mhm.
are we on that one yet?
We didn't get there yet,
Oh,
but we
okay.
can now.
Is that it's talking about more than 25 trees, and so the you'd have to have advanced knowledge. That how do you know that there was more than 25?
So they're
That's the only
likely
thing.
going to count 25 stumps. They're going
Couple
to
of
get the chainsaw
comments.
going.
They round down the stumps
Right,
and like what
which they
happens.
can do
then.
in
Topsoil and they're sodded over in
Yeah.
an hour.
Yeah.
Usually
You
our
have to
calls
know
for
that
this are my neighbors cutting down on everything on their property right now. So
Right.
that was the intent of this one. Sure, we're not going to catch everybody, but we will have a mechanism at least to catch some people.
Yeah.
And act
A
as
couple
a
of
deterrent.
comments before we get on to this. With our previous, planting, we should probably have a carve out for revegetation.
Absolutely.
I mean, it just occurred to me now when you
Well, it's part of the reason
talking
we're in a
about
work session with this and not.
were. Right, exactly. This, I
What do you
believe,
mean
was,
have a cover, you're suggesting
if
adding
there's a
something?
property that's required to revegetate because exactly what we're discussing, somebody overcleared in the APOD and they need to revegetate, I think that they probably should be able to plant to the property line instead of leaving it 5
Sometimes you
feet.
have to, like you're
You know,
planting
if it's a revegetation situation.
blueberries and bayberries to make it natural.
Mm.
You have to go to the
Um,
property.
This, I believe this made work session, I don't,
I don't think it was ever
I
noticed.
think it was
No.
only on for work session.
yeah, it was only, it wasn't voted down, it just didn't have the
It
votes.
just,
is what
right,
it
didn't have the
was.
votes to go
Didn't
forward.
have the, right. And,
My
yeah.
apologies for that.
no, that's okay. And a lot of this came forward because outside the APOD, and what a lot of people, that they may not know in the town is that there are no clearing restrictions. And we've seen
Right.
some pretty major clearing in Eastport, other places.
Yep.
And they were outside the APOD, so there were no restrictions on that, and they did it.
Right.
And so that's where a lot of this came from as well.
Well, it's kind of the issue, once it's done, the harm is done, and we have no way to pull these people into court.
Mhm.
And it's not just an issue today, it's an issue for the next 10 years.
And
It's an issue
part and
for-
parcel to this, to the future board here, is always been a consideration of whether or not to have an updated C of O required for a property that changes hands. A property that is sold from one person to another is not required to have an updated C of O. In many of our villages, that is the requirement. So overclearing in the villages that have this requirement would be triggered at that time. We don't have that, so people can like literally sell their house and a new owner buys it. They don't know that the property is overcleared. They try to get a permit for a garage and then they discover that they have to revegetate 30% or
Right,
other
so that
things that have happened on the
long-term is an
property
enforcement
that gets
mechanism.
triggered into the ZBA, and then they come to us with variances for as-built and other things,
Right.
and ask for forgiveness because they didn't know because the person who they bought the property from did the damage and they purchased it. How could that happen?
And so
It's
if we
because we
had
don't
that
have an
survey,
updated C of O.
So the survey
Requirement.
required for the C of O, we could use it as a business record exception to the rule against hearsay
Mhm.
and use that to regulate moving forward if we get to that level.
Okay.
And as you know, the building department is very much in favor of doing such an updated CO.
Right.
Right now, the banks usually require it, or the lawyer will say, you really should do this, so it's voluntary, but
Upon a transaction, you
on
mean,
a
not upon
transaction, but it's not a requirement like it is in the
Before we
villages.
run.
I think it's a
Exactly.
good
Well,
idea,
I
but
just-
we're
that
already
should be on
pretty
the-
busy, and we should wait till we get new software so things are running smoothly before we take on additional responsibilities.
A lot of the enforcement
Well-
issues that were brought up, even on this previous one, could be addressed in part by that provision.
Well, if nothing else, it gets your staff used to the idea of enforcing and storing the enforcement methods. And you could always make these things more restrictive as you move on and grandfather in the properties that, had already been cleared to whatever the standard was.
I just meant the CO, issuing the CO on every transfer of property is
That's a lot.
something we
Yes.
should
That's a lot.
do We wouldn't wanna do it right now.
We are doing it, we do it all the time.
For
On
but it's
request,
voluntary.
at request.
But it's, if I may, I think you should require an updated CO, and I think you should require people to put in an updated sanitary system upon sale or transfer. That's
Yeah.
neither here nor
I
there.
think so too, so we should have,
Whoa.
you know,
We should
continue the
maybe
discussion on
Have a
this.
work session next year, in January.
Is that everywhere, Janice, or in the designated areas like the?
I think, the whole town is a designated area also.
Okay, is it?
For water quality reasons, so.
So with this, we would have to
So-
rely on someone
so the-
calling, right, to say,
Likely, yes.
yeah,
Which-
so, but you didn't wanna rely on that for the planting, I mean, that's how we find out about things. The neighbor will call, they're clearing too much, they're planting within 2 feet, 1 foot, right on the, I
So
don't
it's
see the
usually
distinction.
Complaint driven, or we have our officers rotate in sectors. So we've written both of these in such a way to where, officer whoever who's doing their daily patrol sees this property being clear cut, they have enough knowledge to write that as a violation. So it would have to be very apparent, but then they can respond. We've had the scenario where, someone's clear cutting a property and we'll go post a stop work order, and that doesn't really do anything because it's for the building. So part of this, which we did get passed with the last administration, was the implementation of a stop order from Janice's office, the Natural Resource Director. That addresses the clearing of vegetation. So we have a mechanism to stop you from clearing. We need a charge to charge you when you're clearing.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, and if they're clearing in the process of building, then you have the two most effective things that we have hanging over their heads is the issuance of a building permit or the issuance of the CO, right? I mean, those are key, and financially we hit them with that because most of the times they can't get their loan unless they have a building permit, and they're certainly not going to be able to close out their loan until they get their CO. So those are probably the two most effective ways to pull people into compliance, right?
So properties in APOD would have to have this perimeter standard count toward their percentages as well?
Yes, the way this
Because
is drafted.
sometimes they'd rather have the house and then the clearing, it's sort of a bigger, unfragmented area.
I think
Yeah.
everybody should be able to do that. I mean, if you don't
I
want
just
to,
wanna make sure it's
that
clear.
if you don't want to, if you want to leave, like you don't want, some people don't want a big lawn, right? They want to have just natural woods in their backyard. You should be able to keep that within your clearing restrict. I mean, you know what I mean? Like
But
you do an
this is sort of
APOD.
a U,
But I don't think you
right,
should.
around your
We
perimeter.
could work with this. This is just a concept idea.
So it needs some flexibility,
Yeah, I just think we just need to, if it's working together with APOD and someone wants to use the whole rear yard as their 30% clearing, let's say, and not the side yards,
Or leave the
this
whole
would
front wooded.
or leave the whole front wooded, or most times they try to,
Well-
leave a larger patch, because it's more habitat, that's better.
But are there already laws though that govern APOD?
No,
right?
so I'm asking, how does this work together with that? Because this says any, it doesn't say outside of APOD.
It doesn't right
But
now.
it could. I mean, it
sure.
could just be specific to non-APOD,
Yeah.
just
I
so
think you
that
have
it
to make
leaves that.
clear, otherwise it's supposed to work together.
Right,
Yeah,
Okay.
the APOD is standard setbacks as well as a
Right.
percentage calculation.
right. I think
Well,
it should be separate.
You could just roll out a whole new APOD chapter to include the rest of the town, but that's a little more ambitious.
Yeah,
That's hiring more staff. That's hiring.
yeah.
And this is undisturbed new building lots that haven't been developed, correct? So I mean,
It doesn't say that either.
No, because the problem is most of these are usually pretty modest homes that somebody will buy, knock down, clear the whole lot. So we want the ability to enforce, I think, on things that are, pre-existing that.
And
are
also
now
it doesn't
being
have
cleared.
a caveat for, a lot of times if in APOD, someone will bring in a survey and show the chief building inspector, this was previously cleared, do I get the benefit? How does
That's
that work?
where this draft has the benefit, the 308.
The blue one?
Because more than 25 trees need a permit, and then it's in the discretion of somebody in environmental to say what's going to happen there. That's a human element to it that, your enforcement staff's counting 25 stumps, and now you're coming in for a permit, and you're going to take a year or 2 years to revegetate and do what they want.
So
There was another one that's not involved here, which was like 2,000 square feet
Yeah, we had
Brookhaven has done.
probably 5 drafts, I would say.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
have a couple of,
Yeah.
I almost think you need a matrix.
I mean,
Yes.
just so you
Something
have,
Yeah,
like this.
you have flag lot driveways, you have
Yeah.
all kinds of things that this doesn't take into
This was a
consideration.
work group for about 8 months.
Yeah,
We
we
all
have
met.
we have many different iterations, looking at many different municipalities and how they regulate it, so you can do it. We think one of the best ways is the in plain sight, able to be utilized by code, that kind of thing. But the 25 tree thing is
Yeah.
slightly arbitrary, who
Yeah.
came up with
Yeah.
25, like
Right,
what is 25, why not
And
30?
can you do 24 a year?
Is it
I don't
based
know.
on the size of the lot too,
Is it
right?
based on something? So but we could do like a
A
little
5-acre
matrix,
lot
I think.
compared to a
I
And
think
then
that's
be
a
like,
good idea.
this is what you're trying to achieve, here's your 3 different options, and then kinda,
'Cause
have a little menu of options, so you can apply.
I think
which
it has to
one
go,
makes the most sense.
so
Which I feel is
first,
you can't do
lot
one.
size for how many trees.
Cut down.
Okay, so it
That's
sounds like
the-
a hybrid of.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's a hybrid,
And what
and maybe
happens,
that'll
On
hold
a-
one
on a regular lot.
2,000 square
Sure.
feet.
what happens if I have a lot and there's trees and part of the 25 trees, 23 are good and 2 are not so good?
Well, these are all the, you as the policymakers need to give us a direction.
That's the trouble.
Where you wanna go.
Some
And
of the
then
trees
dead
might
and
be sick.
diseased trees like
Yeah.
southern pine beetle, you wouldn't want someone to have to come to court because they have a fire hazard,
Yeah.
because they have trees that are diseased and need to be
Yeah.
removed. So we just have to like build that in.
Yeah, some kind of thing.
You know, this is particularly something that small villages do well because they're so small.
Yeah.
And because there's so many eyes on it, and sometimes
And
it's,
they have a good inventory of their lots and
well, sometimes
what's,
it's a permit for any clearing, and it's such a small place that that's feasible for their staff to go and today we're working on this lot. Today we're a little bigger. We're a bigger net here, so we need something that your layman staff, with basic code enforcement knowledge can handle, and something that balances these interests of, habitat preservation and building and all these other things that we do.
Yeah, we just want it to be successful, so it's the best kind of code is one that you can enforce,
That's
so
a
that
lot of
people
work.
understand it.
That's
and,
straightforward and
It's understandable, everybody knows the rules, and we can see and enforce it.
I don't know what you think, Maria, but I like the Tommy John draft. I think it acts as a good framework. With
Which one is that?
this
Needs
one,
work.
with
The
some
chart.
some
One
hy-
says July 26th.
some hybridization of the more simpler document.
So how's this? We change the feet to trees? Is that a good starting point?
Yeah.
No, I thought we weren't
I-
doing that.
Oh yeah, I think I think no, the acreage is fine. Didn't you say that's with the laser measures or it's more
That
easily
was
able
the
to determine that?
box, yeah.
Yeah, I think that the trees are I think what was mentioned earlier that could be very arbitrary and also could be hidden very quickly by
Sure.
excavation.
This would not require revegetation. Right?
Well,
A
it
house
could.
with on a half acre that had cleared, but now
We did have a section we drafted for replacement of trees, 230 sub 7. You had sponsored it.
if they were removed, I know.
Right.
What do you think?
I'm saying if there's a property now that
I think
exists
they should give
in
us
some
what they were
place in the
gonna
town
some
where
sort of
this
a
was not a requirement, and they now have lawn, we're not going to require them to plant. Or,
We can.
right, this is what I'm saying, is I don't believe that we should. I also am concerned that just this very conversation is gonna start chainsaws all over the town. You know, it's-
We hope not.
I think
well,
that's a little
So
bit.
do you think we shouldn't do it?
Oh, I don't
that's
think that's
exaggerated.
too
no,
far
I'm
off
not
the
saying we
mark.
shouldn't do it, I'm just saying it is a concern.
I mean, we've been contending with an issue, this town board, with respect to clearing on a number of issues, whether it's Eastport, the Westwoods property. I mean, we should really be serious about this issue, and I don't think we should play political football about it either. And
I'm sorry.
I'm not you,
I was
not
playing
you,
political
not you,
football at all.
not
I do
you,
agree with
not
reality
you, Tommy John,
that, this
Tommy
is in
John.
response to
No,
what
it's
I said,
me.
Councilman.
I'm just trying to say this is an issue that the CACs and the civics have been talking about for a very long time. They've been telling us they'd like us to take action. I have received calls from constituents about clearing issues. it's something about it. This is about doing our jobs. I think we have to do our jobs. I think we have to take this very seriously and be ambitious about this. I get that there are some concerns about, what this legislation includes, what it doesn't include, and we can have that conversation. That's why we're having a work session. But what I'd like to not do is try to minimize the importance of this particular matter. That I think if we care about our environment as much as we say, we should really be serious about it. That's all.
Well, how about a moratorium on this? Is that something that would be,
Moratorium on all
to
clearing?
specifically address what I said about outside the APOD, in the next couple of weeks? If this were to move forward, there would be a period of time that
The thing is this,
that people could clear while the thing is, going through its public hearings.
So someone has
Well,
a house lot, they
and
own
now.
a piece of property privately. And that person, and you all may or may not own your own property, their contention is they own those trees, those are their trees. And if they wanna cut them down, they can, and cause it's on their property. And so I just
Yeah.
wanna make the point that if someone has a house lot and it's their property and they have a tree that they wanna remove, and what is the public's right to say you can't touch the tree on your property?
Mhm.
And that just needs to be clear here,
Mhm.
because we need to act in the public interest and say, it's in our interest that you don't clear a big segment of trees, cause that's a habitat, or a tree in the right of way that contributes to community character, beautiful old, tree, oaks, or things that like in, the right of way in Bridgehampton, or.
And the table
and
seems
those
to
things
address
have to be
this.
Very clear.
right?
Yeah, I think so. When you put a that means that you're taking someone's rights away when you do things
Well,
like that. So I
while
just wanna
the
make sure you just
laws
be careful
get
with that.
sorted out is.
Sure, and I'm all for retaining every tree we can. Like, I just wanna make that clear, but at the same time, in a way that doesn't compromise someone's ability to, put an addition on for their elderly, whoever that needs to live there, and, I just wanna make it fair. That would be,
And
and I know you do too.
And
so.
there's always has to be,
A balance.
Yeah.
yeah, and there's also a question, it's a very real question right now, where we have lots that are completely infested with pine beetles. And, they may need to clear cut their lot because they have to remove the infected trees.
Right.
So,
So could all those things be
There's gotta
addressed in
be
this
a-
legislation?
I think that's what we're talking about with the
Yeah.
matrix. Let's put
Yeah.
like dead and diseased trees
Right.
within 5 feet of a property line.
Right.
What if it's in the public right of way? What if it's
That's
on
great.
your side yard, your rear yard? Is it a big habitat? We always and every time want unfragmented habitat over a little 10-foot strip.
Right.
I'd rather the 10 feet be adjacent to more because that gives a lot more vibrancy and diversity to an ecosystem than a little 10-foot, strip of
Sure.
land next to you. You're buffering yourself from your neighbor. But at the same time, like you said, nuisance is a true problem, and that is something that you're concerned with, making sure that people are living peacefully amongst one another.
And there are clearing restrictions on.
Well, if you want to start regulating that,
No thanks.
As part of subdivision approvals, there are subdivisions that have clearing restrictions on the individual lots, right? In some
Yes,
places.
but usually it's a conservation easement and it has some nexus to some reason
Yeah,
why
right, yeah.
that needed to happen.
Mhm.
It's not just, across the board, it's not always guaranteed. So, but
Right.
we can find those nexus. And, I just wanna point out, Marty Shea did a lot of work in this regard,
Yeah.
where he looked at what's left of the whole town and said, this makes sense over here,
Mhm.
this doesn't. So I would ask to include him in a conversation.
No, I think that's a great.
Another work
It's a good
session, because he's out there in the field day in and day out looking at these things and could tell you, this is important and this is marginal, but you could, maybe in those places that are marginal, the point would be to add more. We need to create more planting plants.
Well,
adding
some
to
of
it.
that too is where the arbitrary numbers come into play. Because if we're gonna preserve everything, then we need a way to have something that's a violation. If it's 20, 25, whatever your input is there, that works better where you're preserving the whole thing. If that makes sense.
That's where that 2,000 square foot standard from the previous iteration came in, because at least we know that's a number, we can see it on an
That's the
aerial.
cutoff,
Mhm.
that's
We
the
can
line in the
look at it
sand.
and say, this is the
I
amount of
understand,
clearing, and
yeah.
before you go doing that, not that you're not allowed to do it, we get to have a look, and you bring in a permit application to clear, and then we say,
So,
This or that.
so could we, first of all, I appreciate your work on this. Are we able to come up with another draft that resembles this, but reflects some of the nexus that you've been speaking of? And, you know,
Yeah.
You know, it might make sense on something like this, like how this started, to make a smaller work group outside of a quorum and come back to the board and do a full work session. If you're inclined to do that, we can do that.
we have so many
mean,
different versions that we're just gonna, I think, meld them into a matrix and then bring it back.
That's
and
That's
you
a great
tell
idea,
us,
yeah.
And then we'll write the code, based
Yeah.
on you say yes, no, maybe, and then we'll
that's
put
great.
it all into a code format. Okay, good,
All right, thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
thank you.
Um,
The 5 foot one though, I mean, you don't have to wait on that if you
Right,
want
is
to
the
go
board
forward.
inclined to move forward with something like that separately from this?
I don't know, let me give it some thought.
Okay.
Sounds like there's not a lot of support for it, but we could have a
Well, I
public
would
hearing.
support, I would support it.
I mean, I would support if it's in the front yard or the side yard. If it's a corner lot.
Yeah, I think that's what we,
The
that's.
corner lot is, you know, a no-brainer.
To just strike the word rear yard? And then
Because
use
I
the
don't,
word-
I think it's a,
Why
it's,
don't I circulate another draft?
yeah, it's, I think.
That's a good idea.
I think do it in the rear yard, it's gonna be unenforceable, and it's gonna make
Okay. So that-
trouble between the neighbors.
That could be
I
a
agree with-
compromise
I agree with
draft,
that.
though.
I agree
can
with that comment.
Strike 2 words, and then you have a draft that you.
So then
ready
what do you
to
think,
move forward
Maria?
if you'd like.
Let's do that.
3 words?
And the revegetation provision, I think, you know, should be considered if somebody needs to revegetate as per other code that we have, because they overcleared, they should be able to revegetate.
The carve out.
And
Yeah,
that
and-
includes
and-
just the front yard or the side yards?
So that would include front and side if we struck the rear
And
yard.
This revegetate is part of
The side yards,
plantings?
I don't think it should go all the way back, say if it's a long lot.
If we're forbidding,
Okay.
You know, if it's, I would say like 20, 30 feet from the road, from the front.
We don't already have something like that to prevent plantings are right up against the right of way.
We might in the highway code.
We have a way to clear the right of way.
Highway removes stuff from the right of way.
The obstructions, but we don't have a specific planting code about it.
It's only if like corner lot, the highway will remove it if if it impacts the clearing, vision and traffic, that kind of thing.
Yeah, in my experience, it's usually very large hedges, like beach grass, things like that, drip lines for sprinklers, driveway aprons without permits, and basketball hoops that are cemented in are the highway issues.
Or rocks. I had a rock.
Yes, or rocks.
My neighbor complained about my rock.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Thanks.
All right, that brings
Thanks,
us
guys.
to the liaison update. Tommy John, do you have anything to report?
yeah, that youth and government met last night, and they are well on their way. Thank you, Peter Sterka and Tracy Colson, for all of their work on that. And just to remind the public that I was in fact at a mandatory meeting in Albany on Tuesday, and that was the reason why I was not in this seat last Tuesday.
Okay, Bill,
Not at this minute.
Michael,
No updates at this time.
Cindy?
I will say East Quogue held their holiday on Main last Saturday. The event really, it gets bigger every year. It's still just amazing because there's so many people that come, and you literally walk down Main Street in East Quogue, and you still, even with the amount of people there, see neighbors and people you know within 20 seconds. It was just a great coming together of the community. This year they expanded it. They had a North Pole area at the firehouse. They had the town bandstand set up. The Conic Ballet Theater did excerpts from the Nutcracker. They had a pet dog show. They had all kinds of activities for the kids over there. They had visits with Santa. And then they had nearly, I think, 100 vendors on Main Street. All the nonprofits were allowed to set up, obviously for free. But it was just a really nice community event. And then the beautification did the Christmas tree lighting at the end after the kids caroled down to the tree from Main Street from the firehouse. It's just a super nice. It's really like it's like a Hallmark movie on Main Street. It's one of the most amazing events I think we have in East Quogue, and it truly does bring the entire community together. So I just want to thank everybody who put that together, including this board for helping support it. They'll be back next year.
Okay. But I will say the downtown is beautiful, and so is the tree. It's so beautifully decorated. I met at the request of the Hampton West community members, and they wanted the chief to come too, and that was last Saturday, and they were wondering about an update on the Coast Guard housing, and I'm trying to find, I don't understand why it's not coming up in my emails, but I did get an email from the lieutenant who's in charge of the project now, and he said it's gonna be at least another year before anything happens. There's some issue with the DEC, so I'm gonna look into that further and then report back to everybody.
Thank you.
Currently not for sale.
Right.
They pulled it off the market.
Yeah, and he said it'll be another year, more than likely, before anything changes.
They have been doing a better job of trying to keep it, maintained.
Yeah, but the community said the kids are getting in the houses and it's not a good situation, and they were asking for more protection, and, it's not something that our police department can do or should do, since it's
It's federal
owned by
land.
the house.
It's federal land,
so
yeah.
hopefully
get
they,
arrested on
with some prodding, maybe they'll send security over to do
Yeah, thank you
checks
for your
on.
attention on
Oh,
that.
you're welcome. All right, well, if no one has any
I have
anything
just
else.
one other thing.
What else?
When you come in the front door, the Christmas tree smells very nice.
It's a real Christmas tree.
Yes.
Yeah.
The
I'm surprised.
I know.
yeah, the people wanted it.
And apparently that's what the
That's what they do.
town always does, yeah. It smells great and it looks beautiful. All right, well, thanks, everyone. I need a motion, move to close the meeting.
So
So
on to
moved.
executive session.
Oh, you're right, thanks, sorry.
I was gonna close it. Should
Okay, I
have
move
wanted
to go into executive session for acquisitions and contracts and then close the
Second.
meeting. All in favor?
I
Aye.